for the rest of my life, I would still have ideas for movies, and they would haunt me.
Yeah. And they would haunt you. It's true. Yeah, it's true. As an artist, it's almost like they're just gonna poke around in your head until you get rid of them. It's almost like a compulsion. Like, get away from me. I need you to exist. I need you to exist out there so you'll stop existing in here.
Welcome. You are entering into a strange dimension. A dimension where narratives from across space and time come together. Narratives that could have, might have, or should have been all exist here in one space. This is CineCasters Ultimate Timeline.
Welcome back to CineCasters. This is the show where we watch movies and pitch them back to one another. I am Janglez the Strange / Andrew, and today I'm joined by the original CineMaster himself, Nate Draper.
Yo. The original.
I said that.
Original CineMaster. One of the two.
I said that with the way that I announced that was almost like with the monster truck kind of sound, like
the original CineMaster, Nate Draper. By the whole seat, only use the edge of it.
Yeah.
I think you should just introduce me like that from now on.
Okay, next time if you remind me, I'll introduce you that way. I'll be like, hello, welcome to cinema. I'll be like snooty NPR radio, like public radio.
Oh, yeah.
Hello, and welcome to CineMasters. This is the show where we pitch movies back.
And my guest is Nate Draper.
I love it.
Anyway, today we're...
I love that you also called NPR snooty.
I love NPR, but it is kind of snooty public radio.
No, I'm in the same boat. I love NPR as well. Yeah. But even if it is a little snooty sometimes.
It's a little snooty.
Just anyway, a little bit.
Today we're talking about not NPR. Today we're talking about Sherlock Holmes, Game of Shadows, the sequel to the Sherlock Holmes movie from whenever it was from, early 2000. I think it's 2011. This movie.
I think so. Yeah. It was right around then.
And this movie. Okay, so first of all, as a sequel, how do you think this movie does compared to the first one?
I don't think it's a strong sequel.
Yeah, I really like the first movie.
I did too. I really enjoyed the first movie. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember having very high expectations actually for the sequel and being disappointed.
Yeah, I was the same way. The first time I saw the sequel, I didn't like it. The second time I saw the sequel, I didn't like it. This is the third time I've seen this movie, and I appreciated it more this time around, and I still was like, it's not great.
Yeah. Now,
and I think I can pinpoint down why, but
okay,
go through goods and bads first.
Yeah, I had a hard time even with that, but I felt the same because I remember the first movie something about it felt kind of fresh. I think because I wasn't with Sherlock Holmes, you don't associate it with the big, like it was an action movie, right? I mean, I was going into a Guy Ritchie movie. Why wasn't I expecting it to be an action movie? But it was a fun take on it. It took it in a direction that was really fun, and there was a lot of energy to it. And yeah, there was something that felt kind of fresh about it. I don't know. Again, it's been a long time since I've seen the first one. I'm just comparing it to how I remember it at the time seeing it 10 years ago. But with this, I really felt like... I remember when this one came out and watching it and going, yeah, I don't know, it just didn't quite live up to what the legacy of the first movie.
The first one, yeah. I think it's because the original movie had a lot of style. Like, and you can tell this movie has it too. There's a lot of like stylistic ideas in the way that things are like slowed down, the way particularly the way Robert Downey Jr.'s Sherlock talks, and the way that Sherlock and Watson, it's a buddy cop film. It really is at a lot of times.
Yeah.
But it has their rapport, the way they talk to each other. The dialogue is fast and witty. And in the first movie, it's all like, all of this is like a stylistic choice. The way things are shot, the way the movie sounds. Great scoring. By the way,
it's one of my favorite scores.
It's such a good score. And so that movie, I think, has all of those things going for it. As well as a really tightly crafted story, and the fact, even in the first movie, the fact that there isn't or that the mystery isn't really solvable from an audience's point of view.
But the first
you know
movie,
what I mean?
you mean?
Like, yeah.
I can't even remember what the mystery was. Yeah, I just remember something about him pretending to die, essentially.
Some dude joins like a cult or whatever, and they start like Sherlock has to figure out like how
he has to fake his death or something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's at the end, but yeah. It's a really interesting, but it's not solvable. But that didn't matter because you knew Sherlock was going to solve it at the end, and so unlike most, I guess, modern whodunits, it's not a case of like, oh, I need to be able to figure out what it is, and then I'm thinking of the Sherlock TV series from the
BBC one, yeah,
where they would like, there's no way, even if you had all the clues, there's no way an audience member could solve that. And this movie does that as well, except the difference is that this movie doesn't expect you to, because it's an action movie.
Right, yeah, exactly.
It's not a whodunit, it's an action movie.
Yeah, it's not, yeah, exactly. It's not really a mystery. And I think that's why I had a hard time trying to figure it out, because as I was watching it, I was trying to unpack the mystery and going, this seems almost unnecessarily convoluted. And such a strange way to justify us getting from here to Germany to Switzerland.
Here's the thing. I think the reason, the two things this movie does wrong, its cardinal sins, is number one, it kills off Irene Adler.
I made
nothing with that.
I did the same note. Yes, exactly. It's not just that. It's not the fact that they killed her off, but it was that then there was nothing really that was then. There was no fallout from that.
Yeah, all it does is basically set up, now Watson or Sherlock needs to fight Moriarty because it's the woman he loves. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I don't care, because Irene Adler was such a badass in the first movie, and then they just kill her off, and that's it?
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't seem to motivate him or anybody to act.
Yeah, if you're going to do something with that, you have to do it well. Because there is a way that you could have, the Simza character, that's the Roma woman.
Mm-hmm. That's the Noomi Rapace character, yeah.
Yeah. So the way you could have easily rewritten her character to be Irene Adler. Just rearrange some of the...
Yes.
Right?
Is
that your pitch?
Not quite. I actually did think about that at one point. I'm not sure if I did do that, though. But yes, I thought I had a similar thought, actually.
Yeah, my point there, because like Sims is not an important character, and if you rearrange some of the topics about her, you could easily make it Irene Adler. Off the top of my head, I'll easily just go, okay, so like we'll get rid of the whole thing where Irene Adler dies. Sherlock Holmes gets stood up by her, hunts her down at Watson's bachelor party, and it turns out that the reason Irene Adler hasn't been hanging out with Watson is because she's been blackmailed.
Right, and she's trying to find her brother, who is also...
I wouldn't even do her brother. I would add a level of intrigue. And be like, it's her husband.
Oh, I like that better. Yeah.
And the reason she's being blackmailed is because Moriarty had her married off.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so now, like, she has to, like, play along with Moriarty's plan because it's her husband, but she doesn't love her husband, but Sherlock Holmes doesn't know that. I mean, now we have a level of, like, depth to Sherlock's stakes in the game.
Right, yeah. Okay, see, already.
And also, Rachel McAdams as Irene Adler was an amazing choice. I don't think her accent was really all that great, but, like, it's good.
Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's a good casting, and it works, and to kill her off was terrible.
Yeah.
The second cardinal sin that I think this movie breaks is there's no mystery.
Exactly.
So even though the first movie had a mystery that you were never expected to solve, there was a feeling of like, how the fuck did he do that? How is Sherlock going to prove that he did that? He like lights himself on fire at one point. There's a real mystery to it.
Yeah.
And that feels good. Sure, this doesn't feel like classic Arthur Conan Doyle, like a novel, whodunit, but there's a mystery involved. And I think what also worked is that there was a supernatural element.
In the first one, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
And I think the supernatural element works really well in this like Gothic Victorian era.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I think the reason that this movie could have benefited from like a little bit of occultness.
Interesting. I like that. Yeah. I wish I had thought of that.
As a way, I didn't add it into my pitch, but as a way to like give some intrigue, like because part of Sherlock Holmes is that he thinks everything is logical,
right?
And to mystify things behind the occult is a layer of Sherlock won't stand for that. Yeah. Things have to be logical. He has to solve it. But then at certain points of time, you go like, how the fuck is he doing this? Like,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
mysticism. It's mystical. It's magic. It's whatever you want to call it. It's the same rule that I have with Indiana Jones, except with Indiana Jones, it's you have to lift the lid and then close it.
Yeah.
You just a peek, right?
Yeah.
With Sherlock Holmes, it has to be like we need to believe that the magic is real, just enough to have Sherlock be able to disprove it.
Right. Kind of like the same thing with the Prestige versus the Illusionist. The Illusionist also kind of does itself in the end because it becomes full-blown magic, and it's just kind of so absurd at that point.
Yeah, whereas in the Prestige, you know that every trick they do may seem magical, but always has an explanation.
There's an explanation to it, exactly.
Exactly, and I think Sherlock Holmes the first movie really benefited from that. Mm-hmm. And I think this movie doesn't. But I think the main point is that the motivation of like as a watcher, as an audience, when you watch a mystery, you're going, I want to know who done it, right? I want to know how they did it. But in this movie, we already know who did it. We already but there's no, by that I mean, so we already know who did it. We know it was James Moriarty. And instead of going like, well, okay, then the mystery should be how he did it, we don't know what the mystery is until the end. The reveal of how he did it, of how Moriarty did it, comes at the same point of what it is he's doing.
Right.
Right? So by that I mean when we find out he's profiteering off of creating a war and then owning all the military arms that are going to be sold, when we find that out, we go, oh shit, that's his plan.
Yeah.
But it also just got revealed to us in the moment that we found out about it.
Right.
So then the next layer might be that people will say, well, how is Sherlock going to beat Moriarty should be the layer. And then when we do the whole thing, the mystery where like, oh, he steals the red book and then he wits Moriarty. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like outwits Moriarty. Like, okay, but that was never told to us that he was explicitly trying to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
So it doesn't come as a reveal. It comes as a... it's cheap.
It is, yeah, exactly. And it's also just hard to believe that this guy who's so tied to this book doesn't notice it until that point that, oh, someone switched my book out with this little flip-drawn animation of a guy fishing for a shark.
Yeah. A trout, but okay.
Oh, yeah, whatever. I was just like, because it eats them, but...
Yeah. But, so I think the point here is that this movie is trying to be stylistically as impressive as the first one, which I think it pulls off without the same degree of substance.
Yes.
Not to say that this movie was bad though. I enjoyed watching it. It's a little long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. It's not terrible. Like the thing is, there's things about it there are moments in it that are kind of fun to watch. I mean, I thought the sequence where they're running through the forest. It was really cool. I thought, I was like, wow, this is a really cool sequence. It was a cool sequence. The bachelor party sequence had a pretty fun choreography. It was
humorous.
Yeah, exactly.
But then it's contrasted by certain scenes, like the one where they're in the actual rail car and Sherlock just decides to die. Like, I get that he's been bleeding out from the hook. Yeah. But like, yeah, exactly. If his whole plan was to steal the red notebook and then serve up justice using that red book, that sort of necessitates him staying alive.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I don't know, like the whole, like, I gave you a wedding present and then I used it. I get that was foreshadowing, and it was clearly foreshadowing, and it was well done, but it's like, I know you've been bleeding out, but like, now you're just gonna die? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Why would Watson spend time stitching himself up and not stitching Sherlock up?
Yeah, exactly. I think what they were trying to go for was something where it gets to the point where Watson has to realize that, oh, I actually value this person as a friend, even if he is a dick. But the thing is, it is so out of left field, and it doesn't have that. I didn't believe in that moment that.
Neither did I.
Yeah, exactly. It just wasn't believable. And so, like, when you were talking about the train car thing, I was thinking specifically the whole thing with the lipstick in the bullet casings. Remember when he puts I thought, what a stupid plan. Like, what? I was like, and I planned it. Like, what?
I planned it. Like, how did you know he was going to pick that exact bullet?
Yeah, exactly. So it was things like that. Or specifically, I mentioned the red, the book swapperoo.
Yeah,
I was like, I was like, honestly, no, he would have noticed by now. He would have figured out that someone had, if this was in the book that he had like access to all of his worthly, all possessions, he would have had kept better eye on it.
He would have.
So yeah,
I don't know.
there was a lot of little things like that I at a certain point I just really started questioning the logic of it. Another example, I had a hard time believing the whole circumstance of Watson getting completely drunk on the night before his wedding, and then strolling into his wedding, like completely hungover. I just didn't believe that. I did not believe that he would be I get that. I think what they're trying to do is like, oh, he was disappointed that his friends weren't invited out, and so he got drunk and gambled.
We also know that he's a gambler. Yes. But Watson canonically is a gambler.
Yes. Okay. But even if that's the case, to get to, I just questioned. It was something where I went, I don't know, but this seemed like something he was really like. All we know up to this point is that he's getting married and he's excited about it, and he wants it like everything to go right, and then to kind of there's a way to do it, and I just felt like it didn't land in this case.
Didn't land. Okay.
But that was just another little thing that I felt
it feels like it's not one. I mean, other than the mystery and the mistreatment of Irene Adler, it's not one thing. It's just a bunch of little things that add up to feeling dissatisfied.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why
I feel like.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go on.
I was going to say, I had a really hard time with the pitch, actually, for that reason, because I had a really hard time actually even just figuring out, like, what is the story here? I think it's supposed to be about, like, Sherlock Holmes and Watson's going away, and Sherlock's
That's what it felt like the theme, but then it also felt like it's supposed to be like Sherlock's finally met his match.
Yeah, exactly.
And, like, that's the major conflict, but it all feels very strange.
It was hard to identify a clear through line.
Tiny little things, yeah. Are there any... We've been focusing on the negatives, mostly the big negatives. Are there any things that you like really liked about this movie?
Okay, well, we talked about Hans Zimmer's music. The one thing... There was a speech that Moriarty gave where he talked about, like, oh, your real villain is human nature. And I... Because... Obviously, if you know about what happens in the history following the next 2 decades, you know that war is imminent. Yeah. So it's a speech that has a little bit more subtext to it, and I thought there was something. I didn't think it was on its own. It was actually necessarily a strong point of the movie, but I felt like it was one of those things where I went, oh, okay, there's something here. I'm reminded of the fact that this falls within a context of a human history, and that they're trying to tie it into that, and it ties to those things. So I felt that was another thing that I wanted to see more of was, and if I had more time, I actually would have done some research on the period, because I think Sherlock Holmes, for like a contemporary audience today, I think that's something that would actually make this... it would give it a little bit more flavor, is to like put it at a very specific point in history and then relate that to today. I mean, that's just something I like whenever period pieces, when like a really good period piece comes out, is it's like it focuses on something specific in history, but there's something in it that goes, oh, but that's actually like a lesson.
Super relevant to today.
Exactly. And so one thing that they didn't do anything with it, not necessarily that, I don't think this is a bad thing, but an example of something they could have taken and run with was the whole rise of nationalism. And I actually talked, because in the beginning he's like, oh, some people thought it was nationalists, some people thought it was anarchists. And I thought, oh, okay, like that's it.
That's really interesting.
That is interesting.
Oh, that's a really interesting take, yeah. Then that's a good theme to run with if that's where you want to go.
Yeah, exactly. It would have been a different movie.
And they play with that a lot. Oh, shit, you really could have done something with that, because they really play with that a lot in the movie without even realizing it. Like, you have the French revolutionists who talk about, bomb making and whatnot, but how they're being like manipulated by Moriarty away from their actual cause.
Yeah, exactly, right. So there was definitely a place to thread those in. That would have, and I don't think it would have detracted, like been a distraction either. I think it actually would have given, because I think another thing too with some of the characters' motivations, their motivations felt very unspecific. Like, so I'm thinking specifically, okay, Sherlock Holmes, for example. He's trying to catch Moriarty. Okay, sure, this is how it's supposed to work. He's the, the private detective who's trying to catch the criminal. But they had a reason, that personal reason for him to go after Moriarty, is that he killed Irene Adler. But they didn't
do anything with it.
They didn't do anything with it, right? So there was a whole personal dimension to his motivation. Or like Watson, the way they could have done with like getting Watson involved was, it could have been, I think a better way to approach it was like, look, Watson, this guy is out to kill you. You cannot actually live in peace with your wife until we catch him. I know you don't want to help me, but if you want to go back to your normal life, that's what you'll have to do. But instead it was framed as, well, just help me one more time. Okay.
It's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, in terms of good things, I will say that, I mean, we talked about the music, obviously, but I will say that I think Jude Law and Robert Downey Jr. fucking kill in these roles. I think Jude Law did. I found Downey Jr. a little over top this time, like watching it. Okay. Yeah. I think I actually really like him in the first. I like both of them in the first. I did movie. Too. I remember really enjoying them in the first movie. Yeah. I think but like the movie sort of lives and dies on their backs. Yeah. Yeah. It's a buddy cop film, like we talked about, right? Yeah, exactly. They have a good dynamic. The two of them. It's a really good dynamic, and it works. Yeah. I do feel like Sherlock hucking himself over the edge in order to defeat Moriarty was justified. It felt earned. Okay. As a sacrifice. Like, I was like, oh, because they do the whole like internal fight scene with each other. Yeah. And I was like, oh, this is really cool because we're watching the fight scene take place, but it's all a game of chess in their head. Yeah. Like we just watched them do. Right? Yeah, exactly. Play the whole game of chess. But then at the end, Sherlock's like, oh, the only way to go is if we both go because he'll beat me, but he thinks that death is losing. Right. Right? And so I do think that was justified, but I think it would have been better if we get the ending from Watson's point of view. Oh, okay. So at the end, when Sherlock, like, it turns out he's not dead. He's like hiding out in Sherlock's or in Watson's waiting room. I think it would have been better if Mary calls him away and he goes up, and then when he comes back, he sees that the question mark is there. The question mark has been added. Yeah. But he didn't write it, and now he's going like, what? Yeah, exactly. Credits. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's looking around. Yeah, left it open-ended. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he's like, who wrote the question mark? Exactly. I think that would have been really, really interesting because, like, that leaves it open-ended. Apparently, there's going to be a third, so... Okay. I mean, well, the thing is that ending, I think, would have worked better had Sherlock Holmes falling off the ledge had that emotional impact. Like, for that to work... So, I think this sequence, conceptually, it was an interesting idea, but for me, emotionally, it just didn't land. Like, by the time it got to that point in the movie, I wasn't going... oh shit, Sherlock Holmes is dead. Oh no, what's this like? What, he's gone now. I guess there's not going to be another movie. But I didn't feel like that. But I think that's just based on a lot of the other flaws that we had talked about that just dragged everything down. Maybe if they'd built up the relationship between Holmes and Watson, where it's like Watson's going away, he's getting married, he's not living with Sherlock anymore, he doesn't want to continue to be investigating, he just wants to live a peaceful life. All of a sudden Moriarty gets involved, Watson can't have a peaceful life, so he teams up with Sherlock once again. Through their adventure, he realizes actually he really likes doing this kind of thing. And then it's like, oh, and then he tells Sherlock, like, I want to keep doing this with you. Like, I actually really like doing this. This isn't boring. I want to keep doing this. And so Sherlock is like, cool, I'm glad to have you back on board, old boy. And then watch him be like, we'll keep doing this until, either one of us dies. Like, right. Or until we get beaten. And then watch Watson watch. Sherlock. We as the audience Watson watch Sherlock fall off the edge and go, oh shit. Yeah. Like, after I just realized that I want the adventure and I want to keep helping Sherlock, now I'm watching him fall over the edge. Yeah, exactly. So, and I think that would also only work if there was, in terms of the way it was done, if it came across to the audience like, oh, he's gone. I don't know. I can't think of a specific, but if there was a way in which... then you don't have the ending. So the ending where he's he's actually not dead, you don't have that, and instead we, the audience, are like, oh, he's dead. And then when Watson sits back down at the typewriter, we just see the question mark. Exactly. You're like, who put that there? Because then it's like, oh shit, like, is he dead? Who put the question mark there? We didn't see. We only saw Watson's point of view. But we also know that we watched Sherlock fall over the edge.
Exactly. So basically the idea that you'd get it so that when people leave the theater, they're having the conversation of like, what happened? Was that, who put that question mark there? Is there going to be another movie? Does that mean he's dead? Does that mean he's not dead? And leaving it open like that.
Yeah.
That would be the reaction that I would, ideally, that you would get if you took it that way.
Yeah, that would be a dope reaction. Yeah,
I think so too, and I think I think that's a good way to end a sequel, because usually people are expecting a third movie, right? And usually in trilogies, the second movie, I think we're kind of usually what happens is at the end of the second movie, it's sort of like all hope is lost, right? And then the third one's coming, so okay, well now they've got to climb out of this hole.
That's all set up. It's all set up. But then it would be like this movie actually could be a definitive end.
Could be, exactly, and so it defies expectations that way.
Yeah, and if you wanted to really defy expectations, you'd have the entire third movie be just Watson. Which I wouldn't do, but you could.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One of the other things I will say is that I think there is a really cool, interesting, thoughtful idea of constantly having Watson or Sherlock and Moriarty reference classical music, specifically Romantic era music. But they're constantly talking in these references to each other. There's always a lot of imagery. Don Giovanni, the trout, the Schubert metaphor as the whitefish. So there's constantly like talk about music and who's doing what. But I think in order for this movie to work, the imagery, instead of being music, should have been chess all the way along.
Oh, okay.
They sort of reference it at the beginning where he's like, "Oh, we're gonna play a game of chess," and then Sherlock Holmes is like, "No, I don't want to play chess." And you're like, I think they needed to lean harder into that. Right. Subtly, but lean harder into it, where it's like the entire time they're constantly talking about whose move is when.
Right. Kind of like the second season of Twin Peaks.
Yeah, I was thinking of the anime Lelouch of the Rebellion, but
okay, sure. I haven't seen that. Yeah, I'm thinking because the second season of Twin Peaks, there's a game of chess played out between the main character and his adversary.
Yeah, and you constantly when they're playing chess, they're constantly making metaphors to like who's bishop and who's rook. Are we just pawns? You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking
I think that's
speaking of chess metaphors. Completely jumping off onto something else. Best chess metaphor in a movie or TV show ever is in The Wire.
I haven't seen.
There's an episode of The Wire. It's like right in the first season, and he's sitting in the projects of Baltimore, and he's teaching. It's one of the guys. He's like a cousin of the guy who runs the gang, and he's basically on a corner where they're selling drugs. And two of the guys who are selling drugs, they've got a chessboard, but they don't know how to play it. And so this guy sits down and he starts explaining them the game of chess, but then he starts explaining like how they move, and the other guy's like, what? That's like it moves in this like L shape. Why can't it? Why is it like that? But then he starts explaining the pawn and how the pawn can get to the other side, and can basically, if the pawn is smart enough, the pawn can climb the ladder of power. And what you see over the course of the show is you see how some of these guys in sort of the drug gangs start trying to climb this ladder of power.
Oh, that's really smart.
It was like I saw it, I was like, oh, that is brilliant. Anyway.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
We should get into pitches. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first because I'm not super sold.
I'm not super proud of my pitch for this one either.
I honestly feel like what we both sort of talked about was probably a better pitch than what I have.
Exactly. I was thinking now that we've gone through it, I was like, oh shit, I should have done that in my pitch.
Yeah, but there's some things about mine that I like. So one of the things that did come up in the movie that I thought was interesting was he says it's at the ball, and he's dancing with Noomi Rapace. Yeah. Simza, thank you. And he tells her, like, she says, oh, you see, he basically says, like, yeah, I see everything. And I thought, oh,
it's my curse.
Well, I thought it wouldn't have, like, Sherlock Holmes is just, he's a character who's, like, hypersensitive, like, absorbs everything. But because he's hypersensitive, he's also actually super anxious, and that's where his inability to interact socially and connect comes from. Is because he's so observant. He also, because this is a thing with people who are highly introverted is it's not that they're like closed off. It's that they're actually very sensitive to external stimuli, and so it's difficult to interact because they're trying to gauge so many things at the same time. So and I thought, wouldn't that be interesting? So essentially, the way I had the movie starting was he's actually at Watson's wedding, and you see him at the wedding. You see Watson is like getting married. He's having a great time. This is like the woman I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. But Sherlock is out of place, and he's having a hard time relating and connecting to this. And there's a flashback to the night before when Holmes is talking to Watson, and he's like, "Yeah, why do you want this?" And Watson's like, "I really want to like start a life. Like this is what I want." And Sherlock's like, "Yeah, but you're giving up your freedom." And he's like, "But what about like the work we do is important?" And Watson says, "Is it really about the work and helping others, or is it just because you can't live without it? Like you need to do it, like a compulsion?" So anyway, we have the wedding. Then it's Sherlock at home, and Sherlock is kind of just becoming more and more isolated. And as a result, kind of going a little bit more crazy. And this is where we introduce his brother. His brother actually comes to visit him, which we know is a big deal because it's like, well, they don't ever really see each other. So the fact that his brother is coming to visit him, it means that like there is something seriously wrong with Sherlock Holmes. And so somewhere in here, he gets wind of something is going down, and there's a convention that's going to be attacked by nationalists. So I tried working in the nationalist theme into mine, and he's like, something's going to happen. And unfortunately I wasn't able to figure out too many specifics with it, but he goes to this thing and he reconnects with Irene Adler, and he basically finds out that there was this convention that was going to be attacked by nationalists. It was a peace convention. Nationalists were going to throw it over, but the plot to actually throw it over was actually not nationalists. It was Moriarty. So he goes and visits Moriarty, and basically Moriarty says like, okay, like I know who you are, but you should stay out of it. And if you don't stay out of it, I'm going to go after the people that you care about. Basically says like, I'm going to go after Dr. Watson. If you don't mind your own business, I'm going to go after Dr. Watson. So Sherlock Holmes goes back to his apartment. He starts going through the clues, and he's like, he just can't let it go. He just cannot let it go. So what ends up happening is, in his inability to let it go, he starts getting deeper and deeper into this case, and Watson ends up getting attacked. So Holmes has to then go and rescue Watson. So he goes and he rescues Watson, and after he's rescued Watson, and it can be in a similar fashion with the whole train thing, but in this version, he basically convinces him to help because he says, look, this guy, I don't know why he's after you. He lies to him and he says, I don't know why he's trying to kill you, but he is trying to kill you. And if you help me catch him, if you help me figure out what he's up to, then I can save you and you can go back to your life. Then you can go back on your honeymoon. So Watson reluctantly agrees to help him out. They trace the clues to this. They figure out that, okay, Moriarty is actually an arms dealer, and but it's somewhere in here that Watson actually learns that Sherlock was not actually, that part of the reason Watson was attacked was because Sherlock actually was just trying to figure out this case. And it echoes back to the thing that he said to him at the beginning of the movie where he said, is this really like you're trying to help, or is it just because you can't do, you have to do it for your own, because there's nothing else you can do. So this essentially fractures their friendship, and somewhere in here, Holmes is captured now. And Watson is actually in the midst of escaping, realizing that his friend has essentially like gotten him into trouble, but he decides that he's actually going to go back and rescue Sherlock, and in the process, Watson is killed.
Damn. You're just going to straight up kill him?
Yeah, I'm just going to straight up kill Jude Law. So essentially, from this point on, it's Sherlock reconnects with his brother. He tells him about the plan to start a war that Moriarty's going to try and profit off of it. This time they try to stop Moriarty, except Irene Adler actually comes back. So in my version, she sort of shows up from time to time and actually helps him out. And essentially, it's essentially the same ending where they stop the assassination, but Moriarty gets away. And he basically ends by saying, like, look, you believe that I'm the villain because you want to believe that it's all orchestrated by one person because that's how you see the world. You see it very much in cause and effect. But it's actually more complicated than that. The seeds of discontent for this were sown a long time ago, and I'm just smart enough to come along and profit off of it. It's going to happen eventually.
I like that. It's
going to happen eventually. But so essentially Moriarty gets away with it. And the idea is like, okay, he could come back. And the film ends with him returning home. But he's actually, and now he's attending Watson's funeral. And
oh shit, that's dark.
So it mirrors the beginning where he was attending his wedding, and then essentially what I was trying to do was he's trying to get Watson to help, not because like, oh, it's, we're together again. It's because he ends up accidentally roping in Watson, who is trying to get out of it.
Killed.
Yeah, and it actually gets him killed in the end.
Fuck. I sometimes wonder about you. Like, do I need to get you help? It's fucking dark. I mean, it's good thematically, but like, I don't want to watch that film. I mean, I do, but like, I don't.
Well, this is the other thing. If I'm really, I think I just, with some of these movies, I really struggle with figuring out what to do with them. So I'm like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just gonna kill one of the characters.
Yeah, that's a definitive ending. Okay. I tried to do more with the chess and movement metaphors, so we'll see if mine pans out.
Sure.
I think yours works really well because there's not really a single villain, and you really played into that. So,
oh, okay, cool.
So this movie starts out with Sherlock meeting up with Irene Adler, and the two of them have like a strange conversation where she's like, I'm busy, but they agree to meet for dinner. But Sherlock decides to follow her anyway. He follows her into the auction and she delivers a package. And Sherlock opens it and realizes, like, because he's following her, and realizes it's a bomb. And so Irene's like, I just delivered a bomb. What the heck? And so she's like, I'll still meet you for dinner, but there's something I need to go take care of. And she's like, I can't believe I delivered a bomb. And the fact that, like, apparently I was supposed to, like, be in the blast of the bomb as well. So that night, for dinner, Sherlock is disappointed because Irene doesn't show. Now, this isn't the first time she stood him up, but Inspector Lestrade walks in and says there's been a problem. Irene Adler collapsed in broad daylight in the middle of a packed restaurant and has died. And Sherlock goes to the scene and he investigates, and immediately he's like, well, this is murder. And Lestrade and everyone else is like, no, it's the middle of a restaurant. And there were, like, people in the restaurant. There's no way she was murdered. And Sherlock's like, get me a list of everyone who was in the restaurant. He manages to get a list of everyone who was in the restaurant. And everyone's like, dude, it wasn't murder. Like, she just collapsed and died. Like, people would have seen something happen if it was murder. Even if it was, like, it just doesn't make sense. So there are 15 people on the list. All of them are wealthy and have, like, some kind of value to their name, except for one that is clearly, Sherlock is like, well, this is a person of Roma origin, or gypsy if we want to use the not good term, and they're the only one who's not wealthy or in politics or in real estate or in some kind of, business magnate. So Sherlock takes the case. He's like, I'm gonna figure this out. And everyone in the police precinct and Scotland Yard is like, it's not murder. And I think it's the work of Moriarty, but nobody knows who James Moriarty is. Nobody knows who Moriarty is. So Sherlock asks Watson for help, but Watson's like, I'm not interested in going around trying to figure out who murdered your like loved one when I'm getting married, and also nobody else thinks it was murder. Like, it's only you. I'm not interested in getting roped up in one of your crazy wild goose chases again. Right? Implying that it's been more than one. But he also thinks that, like, he thinks Sherlock's being obsessive. But he's like, I'll do this as a favor for you, whatever. So Sherlock tricks Watson into interviewing all 14 of the people that were at the restaurant, while Sherlock goes off and does other investigating, because I just think that would be hilarious. So there's some wealthy women, but the only person that he doesn't meet with is this French Roma man. So Sherlock acquiesces and says, "Fine, we'll forget about it. We'll just go attend your bachelor party," only to find out that it's actually just Sherlock following another lead. The reason he picked that place, that restaurant, is just Sherlock following another lead. So we get the same thing. The bachelor party event plays out, and Sherlock meets with Simsa. And the next day, Watson gets married, and Sherlock leaves the wedding early, feeling dejected, and he goes to visit the one of the other people who was on the list, who he thinks is actually Moriarty. This is a professor named Edwin Adelberg.
Okay.
And Adelberg is was at the restaurant. He gives Sherlock some advice. He says it was probably just sickness that killed Miss Adler, and he's like very sorry that it happened. He also offers Sherlock the chance to play chess. He's like, "Do you want to play a game of chess before you go, since you've come all this way and I have nothing else to give you?" But Sherlock is like, "I think we're already playing a game of chess, but with very different pieces." And Adelberg basically says, he's like, "Look, you think your bishop is out of the game, but I have bishops of my own," referencing Watson. And he's like, "I think you should be careful about how your bishops continue further if you don't want something to happen to them, just like what happened to your queen." Right? Okay. And Sherlock is like, that's a veiled threat against Watson. And so Sherlock basically hijacks Watson from the train thing can happen, essentially. The whole train thing that happens on the train. So
with the lipstick and everything?
Sure, whatever. I didn't give it that much thought. From here, it's a good action sequence, whatever. From here, Sherlock and Watson can find Simsa in Paris. Like, they've gone to Paris. They find Simsa in Paris because she's gone back. And they're like, "We think we know who has your brother. And we think we know that he's in Paris. We know he's in Paris. And we think on a tour, like his lecture tour. And we want, and she's like, "Okay, let me get the Roma people to help you find out where he is." So they find out where Adelberg is. And Sherlock is like, "I'm convinced this guy is Moriarty." But before anything can happen, Sherlock and Watson are following Adelberg, and they see him meet with two French people. And Watson is like, "Yo, those were two people who were at the restaurant."
Okay.
Like, I interviewed them. Those are two people who were at the restaurant. So Watson is basically told to like follow Adelberg, while Sherlock and Simsa talk to the French radicalist group, and the whole thing with the bomb can go down, like where they try to figure out what the bomb is, and they think it's in the opera, but it's not. And then Watson instead sees that Adelberg is talking to another man, but this time he recognizes the man as one Sebastian Moran, who is an excellent sniper, and he recognizes him because the two of them never served together, but they were both in the Afghani war. So the bomb goes off. Sherlock finds the bullet, which explains what Moran was doing there. He's an elite sniper. The man who was killed has all his assets bought by another man who, incidentally, was also at the restaurant.
Okay.
So from there, all the stuff that happened in Germany can play out, with like the factory and the lighthouse can like fall on the thing. And then they're finally at the Reichenbach castle. And Watson and Simsa search for the person they think will try to kill one of the ambassadors and start the war. Simsa stops the bullet, Simsa stops her brother from shooting the bullet, and Watson can have an awesome confrontation with Sebastian Moran. I just feel like Watson needs more to do. So why have Sebastian Moran there and have Watson there if the two of them don't get into some kind of fight?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
So I think it would be dope, because it would be like, what if Watson is clearly like a stronger individual, like hand-to-hand combat, but Sebastian is a better like marksman. Right. So have the two of them like play off of that, each trying to play to their strengths. I just think that would be cool. Anyway,
yeah.
So that's all going down, and so that's happening. We see all this happening in like a conference room with Watson and Simsa, and Sebastian Moran shows up, but he looks like hurried, and they get into a confrontation. And Sebastian is looking for what's his name? It appears that he's looking for Adelberg. So basically, then what happens is before Moriarty, or I guess before Adelberg can show up at the castle, he's sidetracked into another room by Sherlock. And Sherlock's like, let's sit down and play that game of chess. And so he basically tells Adelberg, he's like, this is your plan. You are James Moriarty, which was a cover that you've been using. It's just a name that you've been using, and you've been basically concocting a plan to create war and then profit off of it. And then Sherlock puts him into check, but not checkmate, just puts him into check.
Right.
And Edwin is like, well, congratulations. Like, you're being right on all accounts except for one. But before I can tell you what that is, how do you think I murdered Irene Adler then? If you were convinced it was me. So Sherlock explains that he knew that the tea was poisoned, and it was made to look like an illness through the poison. And the reason he could tell is because Irene Adler's lipstick was reapplied after she died to hide the color of her lips turning blue. And he's like, I could tell that the lipstick was applied after she died, not before. And Edwin is like, claps. He's like, that's exactly right, except... and now every time they talk, they're like making chess moves. So it's like down to the wire.
Right.
And he's like, that's pretty good, except the problem is that the problem is that if the whole restaurant was packed, somebody would have seen me reapply the lipstick. And they keep going back and forth, and finally Sherlock puts Adelberg's like king into checkmate, and Adelberg says, congratulations, and he knocks his own king over. Like, he just like tips it over, and he says, you've won this game, Mr. Holmes, except the problem is that you thought we were playing one game of chess when we were actually playing 14, because every person in the restaurant is Moriarty.
Oh.
James Moriarty is a name that is owned by an organization of people who are all going to profit off of this. So you lose. But then,
snap.
Yeah. But Sherlock counters. He basically says, actually, I knew all about the other people because I stole your book and figured it out. And so we actually do know that there was 14 other people. The trick is that I made you think we were only playing one game of chess when I was winning all 14.
Nice.
And so basically what happens is the way that they pulled it off is that only people who were given an invitation to the actual event in the castle were given a second invitation, one that invited them to a different location. So everything that happened with Watson and Simza, and the reason that Sebastian Moran was trying to find Adelberg was because the whole thing was a setup. And Adelberg walks back into the main like ballroom where everything is taking place, and it's empty.
Oh, okay, nice.
So they set up made sure that only people who needed to be there were actually in the conference, and they changed the location without telling anyone who didn't need to be there. So the whole place is empty except for what's
the 14.
And it turns out except for Adelberg. So it turns out that so then the two of them can like fight it out the way they do in their like brain, doing the brain fighting, because I actually like the same like they would say do chess, but in this time Sherlock says, you see, when you thought we were playing 14 games, I allowed you to think that you were winning, but I know I can't win this chess game. And Moriarty's like, I know that. And he's like, the problem again, Adelberg, is that you think that if I die, I lose. And that's just not the case. And he hucks both of them over the edge.
Oh, okay.
And he actually does die in my version.
Oh, nice. Okay.
It's just, I feel like if he's still alive, it's not justified. Like, it's not earned.
Yeah, exactly.
So in my version, he's still alive. And in my version, he dies, sorry. He hucks himself over the edge in order to justify
right
why death is. Yeah, cool. So
nice. No, okay. What I liked that you did is you actually, well, you made a mystery Like, you actually put a
It
mystery.
needed to be a mystery.
Yeah, yeah.
The whole thing
it was around who killed Irene Adler, which I thought was a smart
how.
choice.
And
Yeah, exactly.
how.
And how, which I thought that was a smart choice.
Because I always think that's like a classic mystery has to be who done it and how did they done it.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think
Yeah.
I think that was a better way to approach it, because that's when you think of Sherlock Holmes, that's what it is. It's like, there's been a murder. Who did it? Yeah.
I also like the idea of playing on Sherlock's obsession. I maybe could have leaned into this a little bit more, but having it be like only Sherlock knows that she was murdered.
Yes.
He's convinced, and everyone else is like, I don't see how.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a room full of people.
Yeah, exactly.
And Sherlock, yeah. So.
And it's also like he's got to vindicate himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's like stakes, personal stakes, and I maybe if I would have been nice to have a scene where Watson actually confronts Holmes, maybe like at the low point in the story, because you got to have one where Watson confronts Holmes and basically says, like, you need it to be a murder. You need it to be a murder because you couldn't save her. You didn't see the signs of her sickness, and this is the only way you can justify your existence, is that
Right.
it has to be somebody else's fault. Yeah.
Yeah.
All in all, though, I do want to say, not a bad movie. I had fun watching this movie. It's just not as good as the original. If they do a third, which I hear they are, I really hope they lean back into the mystery and don't make it too much of an action movie that just is big set pieces. There has to be some substance there.
Yeah, I agree. I feel the same way. I'd be open to a third one if it was as you described, more of a mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any last minute thoughts on this movie?
No, I think that's it. Yeah.
I would still go back and watch the first one. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm thinking about rewatching it now, because I remember really enjoying it when it first came out.
Yeah. Where can people find you?
You can find me on my website, www.nathanieldraper.com, or on Letterboxd at DraperNate.
You can find my band Robot Philosopher anywhere you listen to dope music. You can also find more episodes of CineMasters and lots of other really cool shows right here on the channel you're watching right now, called CineMasters Ultimate Timeline. Thanks so much for watching.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Have a good one.